Hi everyone. My name is Ella McFarland. I'm going to be doing this video about how, as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old woman, I had an all natural, unmedicated, successful childbirth, kind of why I decided to do that, how I researched that, what my pregnancy was leading up to that, the birth itself, and then kind of those first few weeks after the birth and just adjusting to motherhood. And the reason why I want to do this and talk about my experience is really to help other women, especially women who are pregnant or who want to become moms one day or just have no idea and are just curious because that's kind of where I was 2 or 3 years ago. I didn't even know if I wanted to have kids at that point. I didn't know anything about birth. I was really scared of birth. It wasn't something that I was looking forward to or, wanting to really experience. And so I feel like sharing my story may be helpful to people. This isn't take my word as Bible. Everyone should do what they feel is best for their pregnancy and for their child and for their own health. But I do know through this experience that I found out that in America, which is where I live, we have the highest mother mortality rate of all the developed countries, which is shocking considering most births, 99% of births, are in a hospital setting. So you would think, oh, hospitals are safe, therefore mothers shouldn't be dying at the rates that they are. We have one of the highest C-section rates. We also have a lot of interventions that happen in the birth process. And again, that you have to kind of rewire your brain when you're thinking about this. And it's because we have a for-profit healthcare system in the US. So, the more interventions, the more money. If you have to go into an actual C-section surgery, that's going to again, be more money for the hospital, for the medical institutions, etc. So kind of where this is a big topic and there's a lot to uncover, and specifically even just with my story and how my birth went. But I want to make this like as personable as possible. And this all kind of my starting point into wanting to do a natural birth was not because I knew that from like a really young age and I was really excited about it. And no, that's not what happened. I basically in college, I went through a period like I think a lot of women do where you're very you're very career focused, you're very into like having fun and your social life and your newfound independence and moving to a new city and kind of wow, I'm going to have like 10 years, 20 to 30, maybe 20 to 35 depending on when you want to have kids and have a family. And I just want to like prioritize myself and my own goals, and all that other stuff is I don't even want to think about it, and I don't really care to think about it. And that was definitely where my head was at. And I was very scared of birth. I didn't know much about it. I kind of wanted, if I did have kids, to be like completely knocked out of the process. I thought it was a very gross experience, just like how it's set up, like all the different organs and the blood and the hospital setting. Like it was just not for me. Like I am not a hospital blood surgery person whatsoever. And I didn't realize that I had been like programmed to view birth this way since I was little. And my mom even did have an unmedicated birth, but it was in a hospital setting. So it wasn't this like, home birth or birth center experience where, you have access to the water and you have like a midwife and a doula. And it's kind of this like calm environment and you're tapping into your native roots and your natural instincts and all that stuff. So I even though I did know like having a natural birth was possible, and someone so close to my family had done that twice, it still seemed like my mom was like the one-off example. Like I power to her, but I could never do that. Like, I'm not strong enough. Um, and through kind of going through COVID and recognizing like a new pattern that completely shifted how I thought about everything. And it's continued to. And that's a whole nother story in and of itself. But COVID basically made me realize, okay, like I can't believe everything on face value. Like, I have to figure stuff out for myself, and I have to take ownership of that knowledge. And I can't just rely on institutions to tell me what to do, what not to do, what's healthy, what's not healthy. And so that like totally shattered my world and how I trusted things and how I outsourced gaining knowledge. And so, 2 years post COVID, I started getting suggestions on Instagram that was like successful natural birth, or like, no, it didn't even start with that. It was, it was about epidurals. It was that I found out that there was fentanyl in epidurals. Now, this isn't like street fentanyl coming over from the border, but this is still fentanyl. It's the same drug. It's just in a medical setting. And I just thought, instinctually, okay, well, I thought like if you have an epidural, there's no difference. Like you have it's the same birth. It's just, do you want medicine or do you not want medicine? And then I started seeing like, oh, well, if you have an epidural, this is how it affects your baby, and not like long-term effects, but just like in the birth process, how it can kind of slow down labor, or make your baby a little bit more agitated, or stuff like that. And the other things that it triggers for you to then need. Because if you have an epidural, then you're going to need Pitocin, and then you're going to have all these other interventions, which may lead to a higher rate of having a C-section. So I just thought, okay, like I feel really lied to, and I feel very vulnerable because I was always told like epidurals are nothing. It's like taking an Advil, you know what I mean? It's not gonna change your process or anything like that, but it completely changes the process. And this isn't saying I'm not judging people that do epidurals. I'm not saying that you shouldn't get an epidural. There's cases where they are necessary. But I just want women to be informed before making that decision, because again, going back to my thesis, we live in a country where we have a for-profit hospital system, and it's not there to cater to things that you could. They want to make things as easy for them as possible. They see you as this in and out patient. They don't want to sit with you for a 40, 50 hour labor and walk you through that process so that and empower you to just do it by yourself. If you watch the documentary, The Business of Being Born, they interview a bunch of nurses, and most of them have never even seen a natural physiological birth. So they're going to see stuff very procedurally, like, okay, if this isn't happening, they see things as normal or abnormal. When really, like, birth is, every woman's going to have a different experience. So most births are going to be seen as abnormal in a normal hospital setting, but everyone's trying to streamline you into the normal procedure, the normal timeline, the normal time frame, the normal positioning, all that type of stuff. And so the fentanyl thing was like my first red flag. And once I have a red flag, I have to do like a deep dive into this. So even though I wasn't pregnant at the time when I found out about the fentanyl thing, I wasn't planning on getting pregnant anytime soon. I just was like, this piqued my interest. I'm curious. Like, I need to get to the bottom of this. So I started digging deeper, and I studied the history of birth, and specifically in our country. And I learned that before the 1900s, before the Rockefellers kind of took over the medical industry and did a huge swap in making it all about pharmaceuticals, we had midwives. Most births were done by midwives, and midwives are very skilled and trained into seeing so many different types of births. So they knew what to do to really cater your birth experience to your particular situation. And then there was this huge misinformation campaign against the midwives, where there was all this untrue propaganda printed in the newspapers, and it was like seen as unclean to have a midwife. So then in the 1920s, births started to become done in the hospital. And it was done mainly by men, and these OBGYNs, they weren't even trained yet in like proper sanitization. And when you're dealing with a birth, there is a lot of sanitization that you need to have with washing your hands, etc. And so they were seeing the birth process as a very like surgical procedure because, you know, you have female brains, male brains. We think about things very differently. And they started doing things kind of like there's this procedure called the twilight birth, where you basically are put under and you don't even know you give birth and all this crazy stuff. Then they've did a hard push on C-sections, and if you had a C-section, you couldn't give birth vaginally after that. And now we're at the point where birth is just completely medicalized, and most people don't know about midwives. They view midwives or birth with a midwife as not safe, or they just don't even know it's an option. And so for me, I was like, okay, this is really cool. Like if I ever have kids or get pregnant, like I would love to go down this route. And I honestly was like, I can't unsee what I saw. And that was also hard too, because I was really scared of childbirth. And up until I gave birth, I still was. And I kind of wish that I didn't see that, because now I felt like, oh, I have this responsibility to react to the information that I have, but I am still scared, and like I don't like pain. I've never even broken an arm, and I kind of don't think I'm strong enough to deliver without any medication. Like I don't know if I'm cut out for that, but I felt like after knowing the truth, like I couldn't go back to what I thought birth would be like. And so fast forward a few months, and I found myself unexpectedly pregnant. I have a podcast on that. Just look up Highly Inspired Podcast. It's like the 44th or 54th episode or something like that. So you can watch that. And that dives into kind of that experience and finding out and becoming a mother at that, you know, journeying to motherhood at that age and that sort of thing. But long story short, I found out I was pregnant. And so I definitely was like, okay, like I want to go down the natural birth route. So I found a birth center, and I immediately just like fell in love with the environment, the care there. How it was kind of set up was there were like 4 midwives, and you got like rotated through to meet all of them throughout your like pregnancy and your prenatal appointments. And then whatever midwife like was on call when you gave birth would be the one that helped deliver your baby. And what I love, like I could talk great about the birth center all day. And the best things about it were that there was a midwife hotline on call. So any time throughout my pregnancy, throughout my postpartum, even now, like once you're a patient, you're always a patient there, I guess. I could call that line up, and there would be the midwife, the medical professional on call that could just answer my question. So that was awesome. I mean, you're not going to get that in OBGYN office. You're not going to get that in a hospital setting. And then the biggest thing for me was just that they were so thorough about every part of the pregnancy, every test that I had to do, every option that was available through birth, like just really educating you about every single thing so that I felt empowered to make my own decisions about my birth and what I was okay with, what I wasn't okay with. And they just were very encouraging of like, you're built to do this. Like your body was designed and created to give birth, and like you're going to be fine. Like you got this. And so that was awesome. Another great thing was I like knew the price up front. It was about half, no, probably about a third of the cost to give birth in the hospital, just with a regular vaginal delivery. If I had a C-section, it probably was like a fourth of the cost. So that was huge. And I knew the cost up front. I got to be on a payment plan. So as someone who was an unexpected, was going through an unexpected pregnancy, and I didn't have prenatal health insurance, this was huge for me because I was able to know up front, like what I was going to be charged. No hospital will do that. No OB office will do that because you will not get the bill until months after you have the kid. So there's really like no good way to predict it because everyone's insurance is different. Everyone bills it differently. You might have to do the cash price. That's a whole different situation. So just to like know that up front was huge, especially for my situation. And then I would say I just felt so grateful to have like figured all this out before giving birth, because I just had no idea like how cool like women's bodies were, our anatomy, and they like walked me through that whole process. Like I got a like child birth education class that was included in my pregnancy plan. And so I got to learn like, okay, these are the stages of labor. These are the hormones that are released to help you get through the pain or help you get through the baby coming out. And this like oxytocin being released, adrenaline, these are the things to do to help you release those hormones when you need to so that you aren't in as much pain. So like whenever I would see someone like in a movie or like a TV show prepping for like a natural birth, it was always kind of like presented with this underlying tone of, oh, that's like voodoo medicine, like, oh, that's just wishful thinking. Herbs aren't like as powerful as a pharmaceutical drug. And I feel like that's a lot of our culture and a lot of things. And whenever someone would like attempt a natural birth in a movie, like that would kind of be the same mindset too. Like, oh, like yoga, breathing. But it never got to the detail that these birth classes were teaching me, which was like, okay, breathing's actually, it decreases your pain by like 60%. Like they gave you like the actual statistics, the actual information, and they tied it into like how the actual birth process is going. So like the pain management techniques that you could use to help counter an actual process that was going through. So it was very medical, it was very specific, and it was really to help you like get through, to tap into your natural instinct, which is to give birth unmedicated, and to help you do that with just very basic techniques that actually like made all the difference. And one technique that should be like really obvious, but like giving birth on your back is so painful. I did not labor at all on my back. I would try to like do it to rest, and I would be in excruciating pain. I couldn't do it. I labored every other position: shower, bathtub, on my hands and knees, standing up, like squatting, like everything but laying on my back. But think about like, oh my gosh, like think about every birth that you've seen. Like it's a woman in a hospital bed laying on her back. And so for me to be like, okay, that has nothing to, like, whoa, like that has nothing to do with medicine that I take or an IV or whatever, an epidural, Pitocin, none of that stuff. It's just I have to switch positions. And it alleviated so much pain and gave me so much relief during that birth. So that was just like one simple thing. Another simple thing was like, your brain has like pain receptors. So the reason why we feel pain is to, or just uncomfortableness is to tell us that like something's wrong. And so pain's actually like a really good thing. And you learn this in psychology. So like if you touch a burner, your hand's gonna burn. And the reason why we have that is so we don't touch burners. It's to actually protect us because that pain reminds us of what we're not supposed to do, you know? It prevents us from doing like dangerous things. And so I had to learn, okay, if that's the case, like what can you do to distract your brain so it doesn't know where to put that energy in? So if you're giving birth, then where it's going to be uncomfortable is where the baby's coming out, right? It's going to be in kind of your lower stomach area and just down there. And so one trick that they taught me was like using kind of like an acupuncture while laboring to distract your pain receptors so they don't know where to go. So that you're almost tricking them so that they're not sending it down there, but they're instead sending it to different parts of your body. So honestly, like the biggest thing for me, besides not laboring on my back, was holding on to these combs and just like squeezing them really tight through every contraction. And that helped so much. I pretty much did that like the entire 6 hours that I labored. And it made the world of a difference. There was a bunch of other stuff that they said. I, of course, being the person that I am, bought everything because I was like, I just want to have the option to have it in case I need it. And I ended up being very simple. I just needed those like cheap 25 cents combs and doing the different positions. And like, that's what worked for me in this birth. So, okay. So that's kind of like pre-pregnancy, pre-birth a little bit, like where my mind was at, what I was learning. And I had like a mixed feelings the entire time. Part of me was like kind of excited. Okay, well, over the pregnancy, I went through a lot of different feelings. I was sad because I was going through a breakup, which is not helpful when you're pregnant. And so that was its own like category. But then with the pregnancy, I was overall like just kind of like fascinated with the whole thing. Like, whoa, like I get this. I was trying to treat it like this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity. Like not everyone is blessed with a child. Like, first of all, oh my gosh, like even though I wasn't planning this is amazing. Like life is like growing inside of me and I'm not even doing anything. I'm just existing in this. Human is going from like a seed to a full baby, you know? And it's like, I'm doing this. Like, like this is so cool. So like there was that like novelty component to it. And then there was just this like, oh my gosh, like I get to like experience birth. And I was so terrified, even though I had my plan, I had my midwife, I had my doula, I even wrote like my will ahead of time because I was like, oh my gosh, like if something happens to me, like I need the baby to be taken care of. Like I was prepared like on paper, but nothing really prepares you until you just get through it. And I remember like seeing one of my friends, running into one of my friends in public, I don't know, probably like 2 weeks before giving birth, maybe 3, my due date. And she was like, how are you feeling? And I just like, I don't know, like I could barely talk. Like my face was white because it like triggered like, oh my gosh, this baby like actually is going to have to like come out of me. Like it's not just going to live in my stomach forever, you know? And she even admitted, like, after I gave birth, she's like, dude, I didn't want to say anything in the moment, but like, you looked scared out of your mind. And I was, but I also was excited because I wanted to feel, I was looking forward to how I felt afterwards, which was like happy the baby was in my arms, like proud that like I made like got through this, empowered because I was like, wow, like my body is awesome. Like it made this baby and then it like delivered this baby and then I can like spread this great news to everyone. So it was a lot of different things. Um but but yeah, you kind of, it's weird cuz like when I was pregnant, I didn't show for a while. And so I yeah, I didn't show for a while. So by the time I was like finally starting to show, and then like towards the end, like the last month where I was like really showing, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm finally like into this whole like pregnancy thing. Like this is actually like starting to get like fun and like I have my bump and stuff." And I let go of all the anxiousness that I had with like what do people think and like how am I going to navigate doing this like without like a husband and like all that stuff, and like this isn't how I envisioned having my first kid. Like I just was able to finally let go of all of that. Probably it took me to like 8 months. I was like, dang, now the baby's gonna come out and I didn't even get to like really enjoy my pregnancy because I was stressed out about all this other crap honestly. And I started like the weeks leading up to my birth while paralleling like this kind of fear of giving birth still. I was also starting to get like very sentimental about the baby in my stomach. And I was kind of like, I don't want him to come out. Because once he comes out, then he's just going to keep growing and growing and I'm going to get sad, which is so weird because I like am not usually that type of person that's like super kid obsessed and like, oh, like they're so cute, like that's never been me. Like I've always been like the kind of boss girl, the like overachiever and like grade person and social butterfly and independent spirit. So for me to like be having these like crazy maternal instincts that late in the game, like, oh my gosh, to be going through that was so weird and so unlike me. And I hit my due date, and another thing that I did was I was like, I don't want to like be on bed rest in the sense of like taking maternity leave before I give birth. Now everyone's different, whatever. I was like, I want to keep my life as normal as possible the entire pregnancy. I traveled a lot while I was pregnant up until like the very end. I did camping trips. I got out in nature. I hung out with a lot of friends. I just tried to do as much as I was working the entire time. I just tried to do as much as I like normally would do and maybe even a little bit more. Just because I didn't know like what this baby experience was going to be like. I just didn't know what it was going to be like to like have this human that I would be fully responsible for, how that would shift my lifestyle. So I just wanted to catch up with everything as much as I could. And so the weeks leading up to my birth, I was working a ton because I work for a small business and I have a lot of responsibilities, and I just am very emotionally invested in the company and care about the projects and stuff. And so I just, and there, when you work for a small business, there's not like a temp or someone that can easily fill your role if you're going to take off like 3 full months. So I was like, I want as much time with the baby when he comes, so I'm going to just keep things like as normal as much as possible. So I worked up until like, I literally sent an email like 10 p.m., an hour and a half before I went into labor, because I just was like trying to get as much done as possible so I could enjoy a few weeks with my baby, like without having to think about work at all. So that's kind of what I did. And I also just wanted the mental distraction. Like when you're about to give birth, you have so much anxiety about it. At least for me, like you're excited. It's kind of like Christmas. Like, oh my gosh, this baby's coming, and like, it's gonna be so cute. So I wanted as many distractions as possible so that I wasn't like in anticipation mode. So I worked out the entire pregnancy. I worked out the entire pregnancy. I kept thinking like, oh, I would get at some point it would be too late. Like I would be too pregnant, and my midwife would be like, no, like don't work out. It's not healthy for the baby. But actually working out, especially if you've worked out several years, you've always been like workout person, or you've already been in a routine for at least a year of a certain workout routine, it's best to just continue that through your pregnancy as much as possible. Now, you might have to make modifications because there's certain things you can't do with like a huge belly. But that being said, like you should still continue the frequency, how much you're working out, because if you're in shape before giving birth, you're going to have an easier birth. Because especially if you're having like a natural vaginal delivery, unmedicated situation, because it's like a mega workout, especially if you have a long labor. But in general, it's a long workout. That was how I would describe birth. So if you're already kind of training, you already have like a good tolerance for a strenuous workout in place before you give birth, then it's going to be a lot easier to get through that birth quickly. That's not to say if you don't exercise, you can't have a natural birth, but just in general, that's kind of the rule of thumb there. So my midwife was like, no, like keep working out like as much as you can. So I'm like, oh, like I kind of wish you just told me I didn't have to work out because I'm like, I want to just lay on the couch. Like stop, like give me an excuse. Anyway, so I'm like, okay. So I am doing core power, doing sculpt class. I did my last sculpt class actually like the morning of the day I went into labor. So that was interesting and cool. And I was supposed to be walking. Like walking is really what like jump starts the baby to get him or her moving and down the birth canal. So I had been putting off walking because I live in Phoenix, Arizona. It is really, really hot in the summer, and my due date was at the beginning of September. So walking in the August heat isn't really ideal. Plus, it was just really uncomfortable to walk by the end. I hated walking. I could barely walk to my car. But I was almost a week past my due date, and the birth center is lets you go 2 weeks, which is pretty rare because most hospitals will barely let you go past a week or your due date, which is also a scam because really like people are like, oh my gosh, your due date. That was like another thing that I would get frustrated about, was like people asking my due date, even because I'm like, you know what, your due date is like fake news. Okay? Because most babies will come anywhere from like 38 to 42 weeks. So that's like 4-week range. But we put this due date on very early on. And it kind of can create a lot of stress and anxiety, because if you don't know, hey, it's okay to go past your due date up until 2 weeks. Like it is medically safe for most women. There might be a one-off case. There's always a one-off case where maybe it isn't. Most women, it is fine. And most first-time moms, you are going to go past your due date. That's just statistically what will happen. Now, in the hospital setting, a lot of times, and again, I'm generalizing here, but this is usually what happens. They approach your due date, and even before your due date, sometimes they're like, hey, like, can we talk about your They won't even say, let's talk about your options. They're like, sometimes they'll just be like, hey, like, you need to get induced. And they'll scare you with, oh, well, like, your baby's in danger. Like, that's always the go-to. Oh, well, your baby's in danger. And so I obviously did not want to get induced because once you get induced, usually it's with Pitocin. Pitocin jumpstarts your contractions. Not only is it way more painful to go that route, but it also just, it interjects that natural like hormonal release that you have that gets you into labor, right? So when you have Pitocin going, then you're going to have, it's usually so, the contractions are so intense and so painful that usually you'll have to get an epidural because either you're exhausted, it's too much, or they need to up the Pitocin more. So then they give you an epidural. Great. You're chilling. Oh, well, guess what? Your labor's not progressing now because now you're like chilled out. Oh, let's get that Pitocin back going. And then, oh my gosh, wait, we need to do continuous fetal monitoring. Oh my gosh, your baby's flipping out. Ah, C-section. So it created an emergency situation because you got induced before your due date or not letting you go 2 weeks past your due date when it was perfectly safe. So when I started to like not get past my due date, even though I was in a birth center, I was with midwives that would support me going 2 weeks past, I was like, oh my gosh, what if like I can't give birth in the next 2 weeks? Like I only have 2 more weeks to give birth. Otherwise I'm going to have to get induced and then I'm going to have to go to the hospital. And like, this isn't my birth plan. And so I took all that in. I was like, you know what, Ella, you need to go on a walk. Like maybe like this, you're almost a week past your due date. Like you need to just suck it up, go outside. I know it's 100 degrees. Just do one walk around the block. And I swear that is what I think jumpstart me into labor because I was working out before that, but that walk, I feel like it just changed everything. So I went on a walk in the evening and I got home, made dinner, did work, was working on my computer till 10 p.m. Decided to like close my laptop. From like 10 to 11, I started like getting the bassinet ready with like arranging all these like cute elephant stuff. I kind of did like an elephant theme for my kid. And so I got like the elephant stuffed animal out and like was putting the elephant bedding on the bassinet and like the blankets and like taking all these photos with the ultrasound in it, like just really nesting level stuff. And then like the days leading up to my birth, I like went on this like crazy baking rampage where I wanted to learn how to make sourdough loaves and was making like chocolate olive oil cake with fresh cream and like ordering flowers. Like I was just going so maternal. It was weird, like very unlike me. So back to the bassinet. So I'm getting the bassinet ready. I'm sending all these photos. And I'm like, okay, like I'm going to go to bed, like thinking about what I have to do the next day. I'm supposed to get lunch with my friend. I'm supposed to like do some work, blah, blah, blah. And I go to bed and I'm like, gosh, I just like can't go to bed. And I start feeling these like weird, uncomfortable cramps. And they weren't like period cramps, but they were just kind of like, like something just, I just don't feel normal. And I texted my parents. I don't want to jinx it, but I feel like I'm going to go into labor. Like I'm going to give birth tomorrow. And, another like hour goes by. This is like 12:30 now. And I decide like I'm going to go take a Benadryl. Going to take a Benadryl. My midwife said like if you're in early labor, like, and it's nighttime, like take a Benadryl because once that active labor starts, like you can't sleep because the contractions are way too intense and it's gonna be exhausting, right? So I'm like, okay, great. Like I'm in early labor. Like this is gonna be like maybe 5 or 6 hours. So I'm gonna take a Benadryl, pass out, I'll wake up, and then I'll be like ready to go. And I was so excited for early labor because early labor is like fun. Okay, like it's like kind of a party because you have your snacks, you're on the ball, the contractions aren't that bad, you have like 20 to 30, 40 minutes in between a contraction. I never got an early labor, so I took the Benadryl, I like went back to bed, and I was like, oh my God, like I am in so much pain, like I can't lay down, I'm gonna draw a bath. So I draw a bath. I'm sitting in the bath and I realize, oh my gosh, like I took a Benadryl and now I'm in the bath. Like I do not want to pass out in water. Like this could be dangerous. So I call my mom. I'm like, hey mom, like I can't lay in my bed, but I also like took this Benadryl. Can you just like come and sit outside the bathroom so that I'm good? She's like, okay, like so nice of her. It's the middle of the night. So I'm just sitting in the bath and all of a sudden like it went from like 0 to 100 and I started like getting what I thought was like a contraction, I guess, but I didn't want to tell myself. Like I thought I was going to have this like early labor before active labor started, where I would like have early labor for like several hours because that's what most women have, especially with their first kid. So I was like, no way is this active labor. And so I was in denial. So I text my doula and I was like, hey, like I think I'm in labor, like here's what's going on. And I underestimated to her like how far in between my contractions were. Like I think pretty immediately they were already 5 to 7 minutes apart. And I was like, I think they're like 15 minutes apart. Cause like I thought I was going crazy. I was like, there's no way that I could be this far along this quickly. Like it just, they didn't tell us this. I mean, the chances of this happening are just so slim. I must be overreacting. Like I must be thinking like, oh, these are way too intense. And so I started to get kind of scared because I'm like, oh my gosh, like if I can't handle active labor or early labor, how am I going to do active labor? How am I going to do transition? How am I going to like push? So I was freaking myself out a little bit, but I was just trying to like stay calm and like, okay. And I like downloaded this app for like tracking your contraction times. And then like 20 minutes later, my contractions were just so intense that I couldn't even use the app. Like I literally was just like, I can't, I just need to like be present. Like I don't want technology anywhere near. I just need to be like, be present and breathe and like get through this contraction. And so didn't really use the app. So that was a waste. I call my mom in and it's like, it's only 1:30. So I've only been laboring for like maybe an hour. And I'm like, I think this is like really intense. Like I'm going to call, let's call the midwife. So we call the midwife and I can barely talk through the contractions and I'm having the contractions on the phone and it's only like a 5-minute phone call. And she was very chill and she was just like, you know what? Like keep doing your thing. She had asked me if my water broke and my water didn't break. So that was also part of not the issue, but just kind of like the anomaly. My water never like broke. In the movies, you always see like the woman's water breaks and then they rush her to the hospital and then there's a baby like an hour later. That's not how birth works. No. So some people like their water never breaks. Sometimes it comes out in stages. Sometimes you don't know if your water breaks. Like if you're like on the toilet or like in the bathtub, I don't know. So like my water like never really broke. Maybe it did while I was in the bath. I'm not sure, but like I didn't notice it. So I couldn't really like tell the midwife that, so that plus like me not really tracking my contractions, even though I knew they were probably like every 3 to 5 minutes at this point. She was like, just stay put. Like you're fine. Call me in an hour to check in or 45 minutes. I'm like, okay. So then I like lost my mucus plug, which I didn't even really know that much about until right before giving birth. So that's just kind of this like jelly thing that blocks, I think kind of like, I don't even know, it like blocks, like it's kind of like a plug for the baby. So it's not like getting bacteria and stuff in there, I think. I'm not really sure, but you lose it during birth. So that was like a sign. I was like, okay, I know I'm in labor. So I switched from like being in the bathtub to going into my room. And I'm like, I want to try to lay down. Like I'm so exhausted. And I can't. I'm like, it's too painful on my back. So I'm just like kind of like in hands and knees, like cat cow situation, yoga pose. And I call the midwife again, and it's been like 45 minutes. And at this time I like can barely talk, and my mom's like talking for me. And she's still like, well, it's only been 2 hours, 2.5 hours. So like it's up to you. If you want to come in, come in. If you don't want to come in, like that's fine. But she's like, just so you know, like if you're not at 4 centimeters, like after 2 hours of being here, like we will send you home to continue laboring at home. So I'm like, oh man, I do not want to get there and then have to be sent home. But on the flip side, I'm like, I am just like really, I don't want to wait any longer here and then be in the car when it's even more intense and I may be in transition or in a further stage of labor. So I made the decision, along with my mom and my doula, that we were just going to go to the birth center. So we packed up everything. I was just like so delusional at this point because I'm giving birth. It's like the hardest workout of my life. And I took a Benadryl. So I'm just kind of like in and out of like consciousness at this point. And so I'm like, so I finally get myself in the car and it's like a 10-minute drive. And I'm just like giving directions on how to get to the birth center. My dad's like, can you just give me the address? I'm like, I can't like, literally, I was like, I don't know the address. My phone, I don't want to look at my phone. I can't touch my phone right now. I'm like in so much pain. Like all I can tell you is turn right or left. Okay. Like just deal with that. So we got to the birth center. And the reason why like I wanted to be at a birth center versus like a home birth was this was like my first birth. And just in case something went wrong, I wanted to have access, like I just wanted to have like a system kind of that I was going through and have like a place to go. And especially since like I'm not married in my own like family house with like my new family, I just felt like it'd be kind of weird to like have a home birth not in that environment. And I wanted my first kid, like I just needed more like kind of institutional support, I guess, with the birth center. And it was also 2.5 minutes away from a hospital or 2 hospitals and a NICU in a children's hospital. So if anything went wrong, like we were in society, we were in civilization. We weren't giving birth on the farm in the middle of nowhere. There was stuff in case something went haywire, which that happens sometimes, right? So yeah, so that's why I chose this birth center. Aside from all the other things that I laid out. So I get to the birth center and they're like, "Oh my gosh, let's take your photo in front of the sign, the sign that has the birth center with the babies." And I'm like, "Guys, like I am not that type of person that like vlogs my entire birth, is taking video footage during it, like is in the birth tub, like, oh, like I'm peaceful, like zen. Like I am very like, this is a workout. Like I don't want to be taking like a photo shoot in front of the sign. Plus, like a lot of people who do that, they're doing it like with their husbands. It's like super cutesy, and I'm just trying to like bear down and get this baby out of here. Like let's just do this thing. So I don't decide not to do the photo. It's also like pitch black at night. It's like 3:30 a.m. We get in there. They already have like the birth, like everything's set up so nicely. The bath is already like filled with warm water. They have all the bulbs like blown up. The little like they have all these like little like noodles that you can like put your arms over the on the water while you're like putting pressure like for contractions and stuff. So they get me into the room and I'm like, just get me in the bathtub. So I just take everything off. I jump in the bathtub. I'm like, oh, thank you, Jesus. Like I needed this. So the midwife comes in. She asks me how I'm doing. Again, I can barely really talk at this point because the contractions are coming so quickly. And she's like, okay, we need to get you on the bed and I need to do a cervical check. So if I was in the hospital setting, I would have had to do a cervical check. They do it all the time. Like, at least 5 times, probably 5 to 15. I did 2 cervical checks the entire birth process. My entire pregnancy. Sometimes they make you do cervical checks like 38 weeks so they can see like, oh, have you dilated at all? Well, that doesn't matter because I'm not in labor yet. So why do I care if I'm a centimeter or 2 centimeters? You could be a centimeter, 2 centimeters for like several days. And sorry, I know that was a lot of information in one sentence. So I'm just like, okay. Like, I'm not looking forward to this, but I know you have to check. She's like, oh my gosh, you're already at 7 centimeters. I'm like, no way. That was like the best, I think out of the whole birth, that was like the best moment because I felt so validated because I didn't, like this whole time I thought I was overreacting. And I thought that I was just a baby, that I couldn't get through early labor. And it turns out I was in active labor at my house the entire time. And by the time I got to the birth center, I was already in transition. And so, again, the stages of birth are early labor, which is like 1 to 4 centimeters, active labor, which is like 4 to 7 centimeters, transition, which is like 7 to 10 centimeters, and then push. Baby comes out. So those are the stages. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm at the end. Like I'm at the light of the tunnel. Like this is go time. So I am pumped to hear this. And all of a sudden, like birth really starts picking up. Like I'm in the transition period now. Like it is so intense. And the best way I could describe it is if you've ever like been surfing and you aren't a good surfer, or even just like boogie boarding and a huge wave like crashes over you and you're like stuck underwater under that wave, but you know like you're a good swimmer and this is uncomfortable right now and it is hard and you are like holding on for dear life, but you're going to have a moment of release when you get to that water and breathe for a second. And then the next wave comes and you're like struggling until you finally, and you're doing that for like hours on end, trying to catch waves until finally you catch that first like surfing wave. So that's like how I would describe the contractions, the birth experience. So like not fun. I mean, everyone's different. Some people claim they can have a pain-free birth and maybe after like a few births or I'm like more of a pro. Maybe I can master that. But it wasn't like excruciating pain either. It was just like, I don't know, it was just like intense and uncomfortable. But you had moments of relief, okay? And so to get through the contractions at this point, like my mantras are really starting to be like my A game. So I had the combs going, I had my different positions going, no back labor, and then I had my mantras. And I had the doula. The doula was huge, which I'll talk about that in a second. So I had a few different mantras, and at first I was like so anti the mantras because like I just am not like I felt like the mantras were for someone who has that decor on their house that like this home is blessed by whatever, or you know what I'm saying, like kind of that like cheesy Pinterest decor. So I was like, that is not me. Like, I don't need that. Like, that's so like silly and girly. I'm not that girl. I don't need like birth affirmations. No, I needed them. I would say so I forced myself, like before I gave birth, when I was writing my birth plan and stuff, I forced myself to write all these like affirmations, and I wrote like 20 of them. And I sent them to my midwife and to my doula and my midwife. So I was like, remind me of this. Like, if I say like I want an epidural or like I hate this, whatever, like remind me of my mantras. Pretty much all the mantras like kind of went out the door. And a week before I gave birth, I ran into my friend and her mom. And her mom had 5 births, all natural, some in hospital, some at home, some in birth centers. So very experienced lady when it came to that department. And she was like, how are you doing? I'm like, okay. You know, my first birth, it's scary. Can do it. No medicine, like, ah. And she's like, just remember, like, this too shall pass. And I loved that. I love that. I love that. I love that. It made me feel like, okay, like, this is just temporary. I can do anything for a minute. I can do anything for 15 minutes. I can do anything for an hour, 6 hours. And then it's going to be done. And then I'm going to have my baby. And it's going to be awesome. So, like, just remember, like, this is temporary. This too shall pass. That was huge for me. Also, another, like, mantra was just, like, surrender. Offer it up. I feel like I haven't had a ton of opportunity in my life to sacrifice. I think that sacrificing is, like, really big in our human nature. I think that's how we grow. I think that's how we become better people. I think it's how we become more virtuous. And I've had a very blessed life and a very privileged life, and I acknowledge my blessings. And I have a loving family. I have had a great childhood experience. I've been able to live abroad. Like, I have a job. I have great health. I've had great friends. Like, I have so much to be grateful for. And I felt like in my whole life, like, I haven't had that much adversity, you know? And so many people have had such hard adversities. And this was my moment, even though it wasn't, you know, losing a parent or a sibling or becoming paralyzed or something like that. It was temporary, but it was still, you know, suffering to some extent for this greater good, which is like the birth of my kid. And so, like, that reminder of, like, I need to surrender. I need to just let this happen to me. And, like, I'm a vessel for birth, for my son being born. And I'm going to just roll with that. So that was a huge one. So those are, like, my two mantras. The third thing that I just kind of kept in the back of my head was, you know, because even, like, I figured out the birth stuff. I did all this research. I was so set and adamant about, I want to have, like, a natural birth. I want to go through this experience. Like, I believe this is the right thing for me and my baby. But in the back of my head, I still, like, up until going into labor, was kind of hoping, like, I kind of hope, like, just as, like, a deep, deep thought, I was like, I kind of hope something goes wrong. Not wrong, but I hope that there's a reason maybe why I'll have to end up getting an epidural. Even though I didn't want the epidural. And it was because I was still so, like, freaked out about, like, the pain, you know, and not having that, like, assistance. And what I had to keep in the back of my head was that epidurals don't always work. Not only do they cause, usually, a cascade of interventions, leading to more likely having a C-section, which I already walked through that whole process. But epidurals don't always work. I ask women in your family. You will find out just by doing your own anecdotal research. Some women, the epidurals don't work. Some it only works on half their body. Some they just don't take. So yeah, you hear these stories and you're like, okay, like, I could still go to the hospital, get the epidural, and then once you get the epidural, even if it doesn't take, you're trapped to your bed. They do not let you move around. They do not let you go in the bath, in the shower. Sometimes they'll let you go on your side and try some positions, but really you're chained to that bed at that point. So I had to remember that, like, this was the birth that I wanted. This is the birth that I consented to. I had informed consent that I envisioned, and I don't know if the epidural is going to work. So, like, why even put myself in that position where I could get to the hospital and then it doesn't work, the one thing that I wanted out of the hospital, and now I can't, I'm laboring on my back and I'm in excruciating pain. So, and I'm getting harassed by the system there, And so that was those were like the three things that I was just really helping me get through my labor. Okay, so I'm in transition. I was in the bath. I moved to the shower. So I labored in the shower for most of transition, and I had a like birthing ball in the shower with me, which was great. I would kind of either like lay on it with my head over it, or I would stand in the shower and hold on to the bars and either be like in a standing position or like a squatting position. And I did that kind of like later towards my time in the shower because I really wanted like gravity to work with me to get this baby out. And I wanted to open my pelvic floor as much as possible because again, when you're laying down in a bed, your pelvis is like, it's like tight. It's not open. And so the baby's having a harder time getting through that canal and crowning, right? It's taking longer, and that's creating some of that pain. So again, this is where like the workouts and all that work that I had done during my pregnancy leading up to it helped tremendously. And this is also where I think age in your overall health plays a huge factor into like just your kind of endurance during labor. And I am pro birth. I'm pro babies. I'm for life, and embracing life and embracing what life throws at you when. So I am not against being, late 30s, early 40s having a kid. That is awesome too. But I will say I do think that there is a benefit to just physically to having kids earlier when you're younger. And I think it's something that we don't talk about as much. I think that birth is like conceiving a kid, birth, motherhood is something we kick down the can, and we just say, oh, well, when we're ready, we'll do it. And we have this thing in America called delayed adolescence, which that's a whole nother episode in and of itself, or extended adolescence, where we kind of have this like post teenage years, post college years, where like from 21, 22 to 30, maybe even 35, where we're still like figuring out life and like living my best life and drinking all day on the weekends and stuff. And I love to drink. I love to have fun. Like, don't get me wrong. I love that stuff. I love to travel, all those great things. But there is a real reality to not just like your biological clock as a woman, but your stamina and your endurance to give birth when you're young, and also just to have like a healthier labor. Again, this is my first birth. I could wait. I could have the next kid at 30, at 35. I don't know what life's gonna have in store with me. Maybe I'll just have one kid. I just don't know. It's not really all in my hands. But I will say, like, when I was going through that birth and when I was like in the shower, like having to stand and squat and like I was exhausted. Like I had been laboring all night. I kept thinking back in my head, like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine doing this at 40, 45, I can't imagine that, like, like this is so much easier because of my age. And I think that I had a lot easier of a pregnancy because of my age as well. I really didn't have a lot of symptoms. I also was taking a lot of supplements before getting pregnant, so I think that helped my hormonal balance. So all these things, like, we're just constantly embedded with like synthetic stuff, and again, like, our bodies can do this, like, we're built to do this, and the more energy you have, the better. Something also that helped in those moments, like towards the end of my labor, was the fact that I had like continued to work out my entire pregnancy, even when it was hard, even when I had to modify, because again, you're it's like you're training for a marathon. So I would say the birth process was a combination of like going through a marathon, like the most intense workout of my life, and surfing, having like a really bad first day of surf lessons situation. So that's kind of like how I would describe it. Um, and so like when I was in the shower at the very end, um, there's so many moments where I just kept asking my doula and my midwife like, how much longer? Like I don't know how much longer I could do this. Like oh my gosh, like how much longer? And it was so encouraging to have women in there that were just like, you got this, like you're so close, like you're so close, like you got this. I didn't want to be like I that's what I needed. Like I didn't need, oh, like you've already been doing this for this many hours, like things aren't looking like like I didn't need any negative feedback. Like I just needed that kind of like coach to be like, you got this, keep pushing, keep pushing, pushing. We're almost at the finish line. Like as if you were doing a marathon and you had your coach like right next to you saying these affirmations. So that was really awesome. I had a doula in addition to the midwife because of a few reasons, but at first I didn't even think like I needed a doula until maybe like 2/3 of the way through my pregnancy, or a third, or halfway. I don't exactly remember. Um, but I was in one of my like prenatal appointments and they were like, so are you going to do a doula? And I was like, I don't know. Am I? Like, aren't you enough? And they're like, well, obviously, like we provide a lot of support. The midwife is there for your labor, but we do recommend having a doula. Now, you aren't required to have one, but you know, it's someone who is kind of like your emotional support person, like your emotional support dog, okay? And I'm like the medical professional, like I'm the doctor. Like I'm doing all the stuff. Like I'm checking the the the, the heartbeat of the baby. I'm checking you. I'm making sure you're okay. I'm doing all the medical stuff. But to have someone that can be there like emotionally during the birth and that has seen a ton of different births and can like help you get through all the stages, like we recommend having that. And I was like, okay, like let's think about it. And so then I was thinking about it and I was like, okay, well, who am I going to have in the birth room? Obviously, I'm going to have the midwife, going to have her team, if that's a birth assistant, nurse, whoever, in addition. I'm going to have my mom because my mom has given birth and she is like my my biggest support system right now. And that was all I had at that point. Like I said, I went through a breakup during my pregnancy, so that the father wasn't going to be there. And he wasn't involved the entire pregnancy process. So that was kind of like out of the picture. And I was like, you know what? Like I need another person, not just for myself, but for my mom, because that's a lot to like put that all on one person. And she's done her own births, but she hasn't seen another birth, and that's like a whole, I mean, that's like a whole other profession. And I think there's a difference between like, oh, I did it myself and I'm going to help you do it. Like, I'm going to teach you how to do it because like you only know what worked for you. You might not know what's going to work for someone else because like I said, like everyone has different preferences. Everyone has different things that get them through their individual births. Like no birth is the same. Every birth looks different. Some labors are really long, some are really short. Some, it's just everything's different. So I was like, hey, like I'm going to get a doula. So I got a doula. I would totally recommend getting a doula, even if you're doing the midwife, even if you're doing the birth center, whatever. Even if you have the best husband or best boyfriend ever that is like amazing and like did all the birth classes with you, still have a doula because at the end of the day, like he probably has never seen a birth before and you're going to want someone there 24/7 with you who can also like tap him out because it's a lot. Whoever your support system is, what support person is, whether it's your mom or a sister, an aunt, a husband, boyfriend, whatever, like it's a lot for one person to be like the main guy. So having this person that is this is her job to tap in and out and kind of share that load. It's helpful for them because then they can really, they don't feel like, oh my, overwhelmed and that they don't know what they're doing and they don't know how to help you, you know? So that was the doula. Okay, where was I? I'm sorry, I'm like jumping in and out of the story, but there's just like so much information to unpack. We're almost at the end here. Okay, so I'm in the shower. I'm getting through transition, and the midwife checks me one more time. So again, only had 2 cervical checks the entire pregnancy, entire birth, which is great because they're not like horrible, but they're just, it's not fun, it's not fun. And she's like, oh my gosh, like you're crowning, like you're ready. I think you're ready to push. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like the baby's gonna come soon. I was like trying to remain calm. And so she's like, okay, like, have you thought what position you want to push in? And I said, I don't know, just whatever. Like, I'm not gonna tear. I don't want to, like, whatever. Like, I'll do whatever. Like, you tell me. I don't want to tear. Oh my gosh, I can't. So the tearing thing is like a whole nother conversation, but I'll try to like do a quick rapid fire on it really quickly. Okay, so tearing, for anyone who doesn't know, sometimes when you give birth, you can tear. Obviously because like you're pushing a whole baby out and the head is big. But although you can tear, you don't always tear. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, I think that's always been sold, like, oh, you will tear when you get pregnant or when you have birth. Like, there's no way around it. When actually, if you have a supportive team, if you give birth in a position that, if you push and give birth in a position that allows you not to tear, you don't have to tear. If you have like oils, olive oil, certain things like that can help you stretch, that the midwife or your medical team is using to help you, then you won't tear. If you're in if you're not, again, if you don't have an epidural or any sort of like numbing pain numbing thing, then you're less likely to tear too, because you can kind of control your pushing. If you're not doing like coached pushing where you're not pushing like with your contractions, but you're pushing based off what like your provider tells you to do, even when you're not ready to like push, that can be really strenuous on your body, and that can cause you to tear too. So that was like another reason why I did not go the epidural route. And just the hospital route in general. I did not want to tear. And if I did tear, I wanted it to be really minor. And again, big picture, the most important thing is healthy you, healthy baby. Biggest thing. That's like the most ideal thing. But you should, if you have a birth plan in your head, you should be with a team that supports that and is trying the best to make that happen. There's always going to be anomalies. There's always going to be things that go wrong. But just having the team that's supporting that plan and in alignment with you is half the battle, okay? So I didn't want to tear. Like, I wanted an easy postpartum recovery. And when I first like found out about the fentanyl stuff, not only did I find out like that affected the birth process, the fetal monitoring, all that stuff, what I also found out was that there was a link between epidurals and increased postpartum depression. And again, think about it. Like, if we have this like normal hormone process of pregnancy, birth, post-birth, and that in time, everything will regulate out. Anything we do to disrupt that is going to set off our natural emotions. Birth control, for example, can make you more depressed and more anxious. A lot of women who get on birth control then end up on SSRIs. after that. So epidurals kind of can do a similar thing. So that was like on the emotional side. And then on the physical side, there is like a correlation between like epidurals and tearing. And that's because if you get your epidural too late, then you're numb by the time you're pushing, and you're not listening to your body. So you're just like pushing when the doctor tells you to push. And the doctor most likely isn't monitoring like if you're going to tear or not. They're just trying to be they're on their schedule and their convenience. So they will just try to get the baby out as fast as possible, and not take their time. Therefore, you can't feel anything. So you don't know when to slow down. So if you're just pushing, pushing, pushing and not slowly inching the baby out, yeah, you're going to tear. Yeah, it's going to be a worse tear. And a few weeks before I gave birth, I heard a story about my friend. My friend told me the story about her friend, and she had just given birth at a hospital here in Phoenix, with a pretty good doctor, OB. But what happened was, and she wanted to have a natural birth, and this is at a hospital, and her baby was sunny side up, so not breached, but sunny side up, which you can still labor and give birth vaginally sunny side up. You just kind of it's a lot more uncomfortable, and you need to like kind of work with your doula or midwife or nurse or OB to flip the baby sideways so that it can come out more easily. Okay, so the nurse knew from the moment she checked in, her baby's sunny side up, and she didn't say anything because she just thought, oh, well, the baby will like turn naturally. Well, the baby never turned. And so this poor woman had been laboring for hours, where if she knew that her child was sunny side up, she could have worked with the staff to try different positions to move the baby so it came out correctly. So then she's dilated at 9 centimeters, and it's time to push, or 8 centimeters, 8 to 9, and it's time to push soon. And the OB finally comes in because, again, when you're in a hospital, it's not like your OB's checking every time. A lot of times you're dealing with admin, you're dealing with nurses, you're dealing with people that you might not have ever met before, okay? So she's like being told right before she's about to push for the first time, like, hey, your baby's like not positioned correctly. We're going to have to give you an emergency epidural, which they don't like to give epidurals this late, again, because then you're completely like numb when you're pushing, and you're going to increase how much you tear. So I just didn't want any of that. Like, I did not want to have that on I just didn't want to tear, and I didn't want to have a tear that was unnecessary, and I didn't want to have an extreme tear. And this poor girl ended up having a 3rd-degree tear because of this, and her plan was to deliver naturally. So okay, back to my experience. I'm getting ready to push. I decide to go on my hands and knees because that was like, in like cow-cat position, for any yogis out there. That's what I decided to do because I did that a lot of my labor. It was comfortable. They said I wouldn't tear. I was able to, it's a good positioning for opening your pelvic floor and getting the baby to crown more easily. So that's where I pushed. I probably pushed for like 20 minutes, and I let them do like olive oil, like all that stuff. And I did a combination of like controlled pushing where I like listened to them, but also like breathing through my contractions and that sort of thing. And something really cool that like they said during this time and kind of during transition was like, remember to breathe for your baby. And that was like huge because it connected me to like, this isn't just about me. This is about getting my baby out safely and breathing for him and making sure that he's okay. So I got his head out fine, like no issue, no tearing, like awesome. And that's like the hard, that's like the biggest part to get out, obviously, is the head. And then the rest kind of just like slips out. So I was like really hyped that went smoothly. And then it came time for the rest of the body. So his shoulders are getting, and the umbilical cord got stuck between his shoulders and myself. And so the midwife immediately like flips me on my side and she goes, Ella, you and the doula, they look me in the eye like, Ella, you got to push with all your might. You got to get this baby out with one more push, because it's losing, it's losing airflow with the umbilical cord being stuck because it's only halfway out. So I'm like, oh my gosh. So I have to abandon this whole like position. I'm in this new position and I just give it everything I have, and I just push so hard, and like the rest of them just comes flying out. And it was just like something else took over, like mama bear instincts like just took over me, and we're like, okay, it's game time. Like, no, you don't matter anymore. Like, this baby is the priority. Okay. So baby comes out, and luckily he was fine. They didn't have to like give him oxygen or anything. And they like immediately put him in my arms, and I'm just like, what is going on? Like, this is crazy. And I finally get to see what this little guy looks like. And I just was like, I wish I could remember everything I was feeling, but it was honestly, it felt like Christmas on steroids, or like Disneyland on steroids. That's what it was like. I wasn't like I wasn't like crying or anything like that because it's not really my personality, but I just was uncontrollably like giggling and smiling at this little guy. And so we had like our moment. We were able to do skin to skin. We did delayed cord clamping, which that's when you wait for all the blood to get the baby and then clamp the cord once it turns white, which again, I didn't know about until this whole process. So definitely look into that because you have to fight for all this stuff too. And we didn't give him a bath right away because that was also something that I learned, is that if you want to wait a few days before you give them a bath, because all that stuff that's on their skin from the womb is actually like antibacterial. Yeah, so I just had like a really pure, awesome, great like golden hour with him. And then, they're weighing him and measuring him, and they tell me that he is 9 pounds 7 ounces. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, like I gave birth to like a 10-pound baby naturally. And that was so awesome. I felt so empowered and just like badass in that moment, because like I didn't even know the baby was going to be that big, because the whole time I was pregnant, they kept measuring like a smaller baby. And that's another tactic that they'll use to trick women. I don't want to say trick, but trick women into C-sections, is they'll tell them like, oh, you're gonna have a big baby, but no one really knows. And just because you're gonna have a big baby doesn't mean you can't deliver like regularly if that's what you want to do. Like, you should be empowered, not like scared into a C-section, because they just don't want to deal with that, and it's more convenient for them. So I was on cloud 9, but I still felt a little bit like uncomfortable, and that was because I still had the placenta in me, which, if anyone doesn't know, the placenta is like the organ that you create in your womb, so the baby can like eat and breathe and stuff. Basically just like survive the entire 9 months in utero. So I had to birth that, and people were like, oh, it's not that bad. Like, it just slips right out. I hated birthing the placenta. Mine was like 2 pounds, which I guess is like really big. And I just wasn't, it just was the last thing that I wanted to do after delivering my baby, but you have to do it like pretty soon after. Otherwise it can get stuck or like cause an infection, and it just like wasn't coming out. And finally, like, I had to like just like bear down and like squat and just get that thing out. And once that came out, I was just like totally relieved. And like, it's just weird. Basically, anything that was uncomfortable during pregnancy, especially towards the end, back pain, pelvic pain, all that intensity that I had during birth, everything just dissipated. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Because of that, like, kind of crazy move at the end, I did have a small tear. I didn't even feel it when it happened, but I knew based off like having to do that huge push that afterwards I was like, it stung and I felt sore. And so I was like, oh, like, I'm so excited for the baby, but I'm also just like nervous about like how bad, if I tore, like how bad it was. And then they tell me, hey, like, you did tear. It's just a minor first degree tear. You don't even need stitches if you don't want them. And I was so relieved, even though it did hurt for like a week. But if that's the only battle scar I have from having the birth that I wanted and having a healthy boy and having a healthy pregnancy, like, I'll take it. Like, I am so grateful. So yeah, that was pretty much like the birth and everything. And then afterwards, I got to like hang out with the baby with my parents. We stayed at the birth center for like 2.5, 3 hours, and then I got to go home. My dad went out and like got waffles and stuff, and orange juice and stuff for me. Oh my gosh, that first meal afterwards too, it's like the best because you're just so exhausted and whatever, but also you have this huge adrenaline rush. So even though I had just gone through this like crazy labor, I felt so like I had so much energy because I was so excited. It was like I hadn't slept all night and now it's Christmas morning, if that makes sense. So we're like on our way home, and that was also was great about the birth center. Like when you go to a hospital, they don't dispatch you for like 24 to 48 hours. And again, this is this whole mindset of like birth isn't natural. Birth is a medical procedure. It's not something that you can do on your own. Therefore, we have to be constantly monitoring you and your baby afterwards. And I was like, I want to get home. I want to be in my queen size bed. I'll be on my couch. I'll be hanging out with my baby. I don't want visitors to have to like, that was another thing. It was still COVID. I mean, the hospitals were letting you have one extra person. If I gave birth in a hospital, I wouldn't have been able to have my doula and my mom there. So that was huge, just being able to have that freedom and not have to worry about COVID rules, especially since it's 2022, September 2022. Like, why are we even still talking about COVID? Anyways, so I got home. I was just like chilling with this little like dude that's now my baby. And my parents like, do you want like the family? Like the family wants to come. Like, should I tell them come later? I'm like, just tell them to come now because I'm like energized right now. I know I'm gonna like crash soon, which is what ended up happening. So let's just like not get it out of the way, but just let's just enjoy this moment where we're all like happy and psyched. So everyone like came over and got to hang out with the baby. Like my little cousins were so sweet and so excited. I then took like 2 weeks off where I just did nothing. Like I did nothing but like nurse and hang out with the baby and watch like Disney movies. And that was a very like special time. And then I slowly started working again after those like 2 weeks from home. And now that I'm like 2.5 months post giving birth, I have hired like a part-time nanny so that I can go into the office. And I will say like, okay, like just quick rapid fire of like post-birth tips. Just soak it all up. Don't waste time on your phone. Don't like just be in the moment and like take in all those naps and those cuddles and have family over. Just like share all that joy with as many people as possible. Like, and then I would say like if you're going back to work as a mom, and you are planning on breastfeeding / pumping, I would pump as much as you can in that first month, because your like milk supply won't have regulated yet, and it's going to be really, really high, and you're going to be very like engorged and like kind of leaking anyways. So be pumping while you're breastfeeding. I got the wireless one, so I was able to do like one pump while one breastfeeding. And I don't like pumping, is not like, I just don't really like it, to be honest. So I was glad I just was like really good about when I wasn't working, when I wasn't doing anything else, like those first 2 weeks, and then that whole month, pretty much like literally just pumping as much as I could while I was breastfeeding and just freezing all that milk. And now I still have so much milk that I'm getting through, which is great. I also would say if you're breastfeeding, like don't like stress yourself out the first few days. It's a learning curve for both you and your baby. I was like, my son didn't like immediately latch right away. And that like stressed me out within like the first hour or two of giving birth. But then he got it, and we got home, and he was agitated, I was agitated. My mom just told me, like, you're the adult, you need to remain calm, and he will figure it out if you remain calm and just guide him. And once I like got that advice, which is like my first parenting advice that I've taken with me now through these first like 2.5 months, it's just like, if you're chill, they're chill. Obviously not always gonna work for every baby, but for me so far that has worked, and has helped with my breastfeeding journey as well. Other advice that I have, other thoughts. Stay on. Don't just throw out your prenatals, your supplements that you were taking while you're pregnant. Talk to your provider and continue on that post-birth, because your hormones are regulating and your nutrition's regulating. You just had a baby, you're breastfeeding, so like you're burning calories a lot faster. So as much help as you can get on the nutrient side is gonna be really helpful for that period. I underestimated the postpartum period. I thought I was naive about it, to be honest. I had read a lot of posts about it and knew it was like, I saw people like complain about it, but I thought that they were just like being like sore losers, I guess, or just like complaining women. I don't know. And I'm sure there is like that element to it, I think, of people like taking a very like natural process and just like amplifying like all the negatives, I guess. I think that is there, but it is a real toll on your body, and it is like a real thing, and everyone's experience is going to be different. But for me, because of like that tear and then not getting the stitches, and just like being sore, I couldn't really walk for a week, even though I've healed fine and I look pretty much back to normal, how I looked before I got pregnant and gave birth. I had to get used to like for a whole week being like kind of on bed rest with the baby, and like my mom had to like do a lot for me. So definitely like having that support system, I would say at least for like at least a week, if not 2, if not more, really in house with you. And especially if you're like a single mom, which I don't really like using that word because I just don't like labels. I think moms are moms, like whatever. Your mom, your mom. Why put it in all these different buckets? But that's just me. But yeah, especially if you're doing it, without a partner, without the dad, without a husband, definitely like having a parent or a sister, someone who, if they can take off time for work too, is really helpful, because I couldn't walk for a week. All I could really do was like sit on the couch and feed the baby. I needed help, getting up from the couch, holding the baby while I got up from the couch, walking to my room to change the baby, all that stuff, I could barely walk. Getting in the car to go to the pediatrician, all that stuff. So if I didn't have my mom and my dad helping me, especially my mom, it would have been really hard if I lived by myself. And I think even if I was married or like living with a boyfriend or something like that, I still think it would be hard because we aren't really a culture of like paternity leave here, which is like a whole nother conversation. But I think that a lot of guys like go back to work pretty soon after you give birth. And so you might even still be on your own, even if you do have like that partner with you. So if you could have someone fly in or even stay at your house or just check on you during the day, it's a family member, that's huge. And it's hard because if you're anyone like me, I'm very independent. I like to do things for myself. I get uncomfortable like being vulnerable and like asking for help. Um, like kind of an old, I'm the oldest child. Like that's kind of how we roll sometimes. And so it was very humbling to like have to be like, I can't do anything for myself. I'm very limited right now. And I never had like an injury or something like that had like put me in that position where I was bedridden. So that was very humbling. I remember the first time that I like cooked eggs. Like this was the first meal that I had made for myself, like post giving birth, and I felt so just like proud of myself because it was like the first like work that I had done in like a week, and I don't know when the last time I've had an experience like that where I've literally just done nothing but hang out with my baby. Um anyways, so I have so much more to say, but we're already at like an hour and a half here, and I know that I rambled and jumped back and forth to different topics, or just different specific, details within the larger story. But I'm gonna continue talking about this stuff, and I'm gonna continue making videos. And once you become a mom or a parent, you're never not who you were before having a kid. Your identity shifts, and so you're always going to bring that new perspective to the table. My closing thoughts for anyone who is interested in birth or going to give birth or is pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant, or just a girl who wants to get in touch with these instincts that we have that we're so separated from with motherhood. Trust your gut. Ask questions, research, be skeptical of all this stuff, and always be your best advocate. And if there's a provider that is not prioritizing informed consent for your medical health, you need to find a new health provider. This is way too common in lots of different fields of medicine. So I just want everyone to feel super empowered. And I think the biggest difference that I've noticed in being a mom is how disconnected I was from our natural like human being instincts. My son, there's so many devices, whether it's medical stuff or just like non-medical stuff, that get in the way between us and nature. And there's so many baby products that are like sold to babies that get in between babies and nature. The happiest my kid has been taking a nap on my chest or going outside in my arms and like looking at the leaves, laying in the grass with me. It has not been in his, in a $2,000 bassinet with all the crazy functions and settings. Okay. You are everything that your baby needs. Your baby does not need all these consumerism, expensive gear that our country tries to sell you on. And so translating that into if you see a baby and see that they're what their needs are versus what society and consumerism tells them they need, their needs need to be met with these machines, and these products and stuff like that. You can apply that to your own life and be like, hey, like as an individual, like the things that make me the happiest, things that bring me the most comfort are free. They're not going to be sold to me. Nature, being with friends and family, stuff like that. So those are kind of my two takeaways: informed medical consent and reconnecting to our instincts. Those are the two biggest lessons that I learned this entire experience. So feel free to like this video, comment. If anyone has any questions, like DM me too. I always have my DMs open and want to be a resource to people. So, okay. Bye, everyone. Hope you have a good rest of your day.